talk about board meetings. So it's entitled, Let's Talk More Strategy, How to Run an Effective Board Meeting. And so as we get started, if I can ask everybody to put themselves on mute, that way we can get through the PowerPoint, the webinar without interruptions. That will be great. So it's all about preparation and focus. So we're going to be talking about preparation and focus and how that's going to help you run a effective meeting. And so here's what we hear most often. And I know I've said this at some point in my career, and I know some of you have said this at some point in your career. So the meetings are way too long and boring. I'm tired of doing all the talking while my board member stares at me. The conversation easily gets off track, and before you know it, 30 minutes have gone by and we haven't even discussed important business because we've gotten off on a tangent again. Nothing gets resolved or done in these meetings. One or two board members take over and monopolize the time, leaving others silent. Nobody comes prepared. Nobody shows up on time. Then they have the nerve to want to leave early. We have board members that don't even show up half the time. Well, the elephant in the room that a lot of people don't talk about is if you are the CEO, the founder, the executive director, the board chair, if you're a working board, it is your job to educate and manage your board, especially if they don't know what to do. I managed in my board, and I used this approach for over 15 years as a CEO of a nonprofit organization. I increased my annual operating budget from $750,000 to $2.5 million and completed a $12 million comprehensive capital campaign, started and grew an endowment to $500,000 and had a 180-day cash reserve. My organization was located along the Mexico-Texas border in the third poorest county in the United States. So hopefully today you will leave this webinar with tips for designing an effective agenda, practices to engage your board in planning your meetings, how to avoid ineffective meeting time suckers, and how to use consent agenda. There is nothing worse than not using the consent agenda in the proper way. For me, that's one of my pet peeves. So you're in the right place. And today's training is perfect for you if you want to develop a systematic approach to preparing for your board meeting, run an effective board meeting that moves your nonprofit closer to its strategic goals and fundraising, and improve your nonprofit's overall performance. So you're worth it. I start off all my webinars like this. I want you to close your emails. I want you to close the 20 browser windows currently open. I want you to close the door. I want you to ask the kids and the pets to not kill themselves or each other for the next hour. I promise it will be an hour for the webinar, but if we get into Q&A and you want to stay a little bit longer, we will do that as well. So before we get started, just to remind you, this presentation is being recorded. Please chat in any questions that you may have, and I will answer them in a formal Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And again, to ensure a seamless webinar, check internet connection. Make sure you're plugged in. That's happened to me before. My computer died in the middle of the presentation because I thought I was plugged in and I wasn't. And then close all your tabs. So I'm Sabrina Walker Hernandez, and a little bit about me. So I studied political science and public administration. I obtained a nonprofit management certification from Harvard Business School. And for the last 25 years, I've worked in the nonprofit industry indirect services, operations, and executive leadership. In 2018, I was diagnosed with cancer and felt I needed to retire. And since then, I've been helping small nonprofit staff and board build relationships that convert into more donations. And again, people ask me, why do I leave the cancer diagnosis in there? Well, I leave the cancer diagnosis in my introduction because that is a part of the whole mission of my organization. I am here to help stressed out, overworked, often underpaid and overwhelmed nonprofit professionals so that they will not manifest that stress in a cancer journey. I do not want anyone to go through what I went through, and it can be stressful, and I completely understand that. And so my business model is to give as much as I can, and a lot of the things that I do is free because I also don't want you to stress about money. So what do? I do workshops. I provide these webinars once a month, free of charge. I do board retreats. I do charge for the board retreats. I do webinars, coaching, and consulting. And I have a free VIP resource library that has all types of sample documents in them. When you signed up for this webinar, you got a password to that VIP resource library. So I'm going to encourage you to use that. Go in there, take those documents. You don't have to go down the Google rabbit hole. A lot of documents are in there around board development, marketing, resource development, sample policies, all kinds of things are in there. And so please feel free to use that resource. And also you can join me for my sipping tea interviews that I have that are free to you. The next one is coming up on April the 13th, and we're going to be talking about wealth screening for nonprofits. So these are all the things that I like to do as a part of the mission of my organization. So I'm using everything I learned to get you there faster. And I want you to do this. I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine a day when all your fundraising systems are in place and you're raising money even when you're sleeping. I want you to imagine a day when someone comes up to you and says, I love the work that your nonprofit is doing. I'd like to write you a check right now. Imagine a day when fundraising has become so easy and fun, and you always have enough to fund your mission. Now open your eyes. The one thing I know is board meetings are not just a series of agenda items or a treasury report that you only pay attention to if cash flow sucks. It's a show for your most important organizational advocates and ambassadors, and that's your board members. You are there to put on a show. You are there to inspire them. You are there to engage them around your mission. And we're going to be discussing how do you put on a great show for your board members. Also, remember, a poorly run nonprofit board meeting runs the risk of not contributing to the success of your nonprofit and can even hinder it. Mismanaged board meetings can turn into mismanaged boards. Poorly run nonprofit board meetings create frustration and confusion, not only for you, but also for your board members. And an ineffective nonprofit board members waste time and it wastes energy. And so I'm going to break it down as simplistic as I can to help you create an effective board meeting. And there are 5 things that I want you to focus on that will help you run an effective board meeting. And those 5 things are: 1, prepare for the board meeting in advance. 2, make sure the board meeting agenda is mission focus. 3, adopt a consent agenda. 4, make sure the board meeting agenda is strategic. And 5, designate some meeting time for generative thinking. 5 simple steps. And I'm going to go into what each of those steps mean and how you can accomplish those 5 things for your board meetings. So, number 1, prepare for the board meeting in advance. I want you to determine a regular date and time for your board meetings. Your board meetings should not be randomly scheduled. If you are seeking professionals for your board, they're busy and they need to know when your board meetings are, and they need to be set, and they need to be consistent, and they need to be on the calendar. So how do you set your board meetings and determine the date and time? So if it's not stated in your bylaws, whether the frequency of your meetings, then it is set by the executive director and the president. But for me, and what's common, most boards meet on a monthly basis. And you will also find that some boards meet on a quarterly basis. If you go longer than a quarter without meeting, it will be more difficult for you to stay on task and achieve meeting goals, since a lot of your meetings is going to be about recap. And so remember, I referenced bylaws. Your nonprofit bylaws should include details about how often the board meets, what percentage of attendance at these meetings are required. Also, it should also address what the voting and the decision-making process will be. If your bylaws do not include these things, you and your board need to make this a priority to create these policies and amend your bylaws as soon as possible. So again, determine a regular date and time for your board meetings. Next, you're going to secure a meeting location. Set up for comfort and functionality. Now, if you happen to be a facility-based organization, then I would suggest that you hold your board meetings in your facility, because what will happen is that will get your board members in your facility, one, and it will get them perhaps exposed to some clientele. So whatever it is, you have to secure a meeting location. And when securing a meeting location, you have to remember that people are creatures of habit. So it would be nice if it's a consistent place. Food, you don't want hangry board members. You need to provide food. Whether you provide food is really going to be determined on when your board meeting is. So if your board meeting is at 11:30 to 1 in the afternoon, then you need to provide lunch. If it's in the evening from 6 to 7:30, then you need to provide dinner. And how do you do that? I know some people always ask that question. Does the organization pay for it? Or does, how do you make that happen? Well, there's a couple of ways that you can make that happen. One, and I've done it as my organization developed and matured over time, I did it all the ways that I am suggesting. So one, it could be each board member brings a potluck. It's like a potluck. Each board member brings a meal and you do a potluck. And then that will build camaraderie amongst your board members. Once we kind of matured and got a better budget, what we did was we budgeted for it in our budget process. And so the organization paid for the meetings, for the meals, for the meetings. And then we also got kind of sophisticated, no, not sophisticated. We decided that we would seek sponsors for our board meeting meals. And that gave that gave people, restaurants, an opportunity to highlight their meals to our board, who are influential people who also attended other board meetings, and they really liked that. So that worked out for us as well. So, but whatever you do, you need to provide food if it's during a certain time of the evening or morning. Agenda, you have to prepare your board meeting agenda at least 2 weeks before the board meeting. You have to disseminate, you have to send that agenda in for packet at least 72 hours in advance of your upcoming meeting, because you want your board members to be prepared. And you have to be aware of time. The agenda should be detailed, strict, and timed. If you meet monthly, the board meeting should be no more than an hour and a half. You have to remember, you have to be respectful of people's time. They are busy professionals. And if you can get this done and have it prepared in advance, you can do a great board meeting in an hour and a half. So what else do you need to prepare for the board meeting in advance? You need to know who puts the agenda together. Now, I'm going to tell you that an executive director, founder, CEO should not be preparing the agenda alone. Can you do it? Yes, you can. But if you do it alone, you are not engaging your board members. You need to work together with your board chair or your executive committee and give them a role and a voice in board governance. And so a best practice is a standing meeting with the executive committee to develop the agenda. Now, I took over my organization from a founder, and that founder was there for 30 years. She did a great job, but when I did take over, one of the things that I decided I would do differently was I was not going to dictate to the board the agenda. I wanted to have board input into what was going to go on the agenda, because it is a board meeting. It is not a founders meeting or a CEO meeting or executive director meeting. It is a board meeting. And so they should play a role in what is going to be a part of the agenda. You're not there to dictate the agenda to them. And that's really going to help with engagement and buy-in. And so I want you to understand that. Are you capable of putting that agenda together yourself? Yes, you are. But it is not a best practice, and it is not going to inspire your board members and get them engaged in the process. And so put a pause on just getting the agenda done and getting it out, or not even getting it out in advance and just doing it at the last minute. You're going to have to be focused about this process and systematic about this process. So once you establish that, you're going to make sure that your board meeting agenda is mission focused. Don't try to run a nonprofit board meeting, or any meeting for that matter, without an agenda. To keep your nonprofit board meeting agenda mission focused, some very simple things that you can do. You're going to write your nonprofit mission statement at the top of the agenda so that everyone is constantly reminded of it. And if you want to get your board members involved in fundraising, this is critical. It's going to equip board members to be value ambassadors. And that's kicking off each of your board meetings with a mission moment. You're going to have a client tell their nonprofit story to your board. And if your clients are not available at your meeting time, consider using video testimonial. Why are you doing this? Why are you taking the time to do this? You're taking the time to do this because it's going to accomplish two things. It helps board members stay connected to your nonprofit's purpose, and it gives your board a database of stories they can share in the community, especially with prospective donors. They will have real life stories that shows your mission impact. And remember, you want goosebumps. You want to have your clients come in and you want them to share what the organization has done for them. You want to bring in folks who are touched by your work. So let's give some examples here. If you are a lobbying organization, bring in an elected official rock star that they can brag about. If you are a direct service organization, how about some of the folks who benefit from the work you do? Those are your clients. I happen to be in youth services, so I would bring in youth and they would come in and they would talk. And the board would get to ask them questions. I now serve on a historical museum board, and you would think historical museum, that sounds kind of boring, but the CEO does a great job in coming in and sharing a historical moment about the area that we're serving. And they put pictures up around the room so that during the meeting, before you get your food, you can look at those pictures and you can ask any questions. A zoo, for example, brings in a snake to the meeting and introduce that snake, because most people don't like snakes. I'm one of those people. But then the board member actually gets to touch that snake and see that it's not slimy, or gets to learn a little bit more about that snake. Those are the kind of things that you want to do to inspire those goosebumps. And so goosebumps are the breakfast of champions. And you're trying to make your board members into great champions, advocates, and ambassadors. So remember that. Think about how you can do that for your board members and kick off your board meetings with mission moments. They will make a huge difference in how your board members perceive their time at your board meetings. And if you're one of those organizations that confidentiality is key, then use video and be creative and tell the story from a different perspective. You know, if you are a battered women's shelter, you can tell the story from that bag that's packed in the closet. If you are a program that worked with the unhoused, you can tell the story from, the box or the tent that they sleep in. But be creative and make sure you introduce those mission moments to your board. Adopt a consent agenda. Now, I don't want to jump ahead, but I'm going to tell you right now, I hate when people do consent agendas wrong. So the way a consent agenda works is that you agree to email out all information 72 hours before the board meeting. And all board members agree to review the information before coming to the board meeting. Now, if someone has a legitimate question, they email the appropriate person before the board meeting to ask. Questions about minor issues can be handled in those emails. What I would tell my board members, if they have a question, just to email all the board back, because maybe other board members might have that same question. And so it'll clear it up before we even get to the board meeting. But if it's a bigger issue that needs the full board attention, it's saved for the meeting, and that item is pulled out of the consent agenda and placed on the upcoming agenda. And the full board gets the chance to talk about the issue, then approve that one item individually. So consent agenda is key, and you need to do it right. Use a consent agenda to free up board meeting time for more strategic conversation. It's one vote without discussion. One vote. So the motion would go like, I move to accept the consent agenda as presented, and someone seconds, and that's it. There's no discussion. There is nothing like that. You don't waste your meeting time going consent agenda, item 1, approve the minutes. Item 2, do this. No, it's one motion, and everything can be included in there, and then boom, it's done. So what types of items are included in the consent portion of the agenda? It can be topics of routine and reoccurring nature. could be minutes, it could be financials. Now I put a star beside financials because if your organization is not in a good place, you probably don't need to put financials on the consent agenda. If your organization is in a good place and you have been providing monthly financial statements and the board knows how to read those monthly financial statements, then put it on consent agenda. Procedural decisions, non-controversial issues, items previously discussed for which the team has come to a consensus, but that still needs an official vote. That could be, slate of officers. That could be anything that you've discussed in that nature. Appointments, whether it's volunteer staff or committee appointments, and reports, executive director reports, committee reports, staff reports. Don't take up your board meeting time regurgitating information back. Because you're sending these agendas out 72 hours in advance, they can read that information for themselves. You don't need to waste your board meeting time with that information. A consent agenda gives you a way of structuring your meetings so you can handle the routine things quickly. It's going to leave you more time for important conversations. It helps you spend more time looking further, forward rather than looking back. There's nothing more frustrating to me than talking about events or things that's already happened. And I think you need to think about that from a board member's perspective. You don't want your board meetings about going over reports from the previous month. You're looking back. You want to be looking forward. You want to be discussing strategic issues that the board needs to be addressing. A consent agenda is a huge time saver. So make sure that you adopt a consent agenda. And make sure when you adopt that consent agenda, you execute it properly. So, number 4, make sure your board meeting agenda is strategic. So this is the meat of the entire agenda. It's about 40 minutes of your agenda, right? And so you don't want to waste time. And so it is good to remember that your board's role in the nonprofit is ultimately to be strategic. Don't become a victim of information overload, because what you're going to do if you don't adopt that consent agenda, you're going to spend all your time talking about what you have done, and you're going to be providing all this information, and people are going to tune out. You're going to be the talking figurehead up there, and I'm going to pick up my phone. I'm going to be very honest with you, and I am going to start strolling on my phone. I'm going to start fidgeting. You don't have my attention. And that's most humans. You're not going to have their attention. Your nonprofit board members should be doing at least 80% of the talking during the meeting. And that should focus mostly on decisions and strategic discussions. It should not be updates and staff reports. That you do only when it's necessary. Other than that, it needs to go on the consent agenda. I cannot stress that enough. You have to make sure that your board meeting agenda is strategic. You want to focus on board level issues. Your board, and a lot of people they say this, but they don't embrace this. Your board is responsible for the big picture issues. They are in charge of the governance of the organization. They're not there to talk about what type of supplies to order. If you're in your board meeting and you're talking about what types of supplies to order, you're doing your board meetings wrong. And not only that, your board is not functioning as a governing board. You need to keep all operational conversations out of the board meeting. And when I say all, I mean all. That's staff evaluations, that's staff disciplinary. All of those operational conversations should be left out of the board meeting. They are there for a strategy, for governance, not to talk about what type of supplies to order, not to talk about who to hire, none of those things. Your board meeting, when it's strategic, it focuses on the future. What's coming up that will impact your nonprofit? And I don't mean the volunteer picnic next week. No, we're not talking about the volunteer picnic next week in your board meeting. Your board should be aware of that. And how would your board be aware of that if you don't talk about it in the meeting? One of the things that you can put in your board packet is at the beginning, put a calendar and put all the dates on that calendar of important events or what's coming up that month or the next month or that quarter if you happen to be meeting on a quarterly basis. But you don't need to spend your board time talking about those things. Your board should be talking about community or economic pressures that may affect your program. Is your landlord selling your building? You know, is the town taking back the building you've been using for 20 years for the animal shelter? Your board should spend time talking about what's happening and what your response will be if a response is needed, or what you as an organization need to begin preparing for. And so don't fall down that rabbit hole of bringing operational discussions to your board meeting. I read a story and a board CEO, executive director was talking about, you know, they remembered once when a particular board member wanted to talk about what to do with some nice microwave ovens that had been donated to their thrift store. And she got very good at redirecting them and saying, you know, that is not an appropriate conversation to have at a board meeting, but they're nice microwaves. This was the board member's response, but they're nice, you know, they're nice microwaves. And that's why we hired, and your response should be, and that's why we've hired competent, capable staff. So your job, again, is to manage your board and redirect them. It is okay to do so. It is okay to say that is not an appropriate conversation for the board. You have to be able to own that and redirect your board members. Now, will you have some resistance? Yes. It's going to be difficult to make the change to the format of your board meeting, especially if your board members are used to making, routine decisions like that, or they're used to a certain format of the board meeting. But this is where I'm going to give you a little tip. If you feel like you have some resistance, or you know you're going to have some resistance to this, what you can do is appoint one member to be the strategy, responsible for reminding the board to be more strategic during the meeting. And all they have to do is ask this question: how will this circumstance help us do a better job at achieving our strategic goal? And if it doesn't, then we shouldn't be talking about it right now. So keep that in mind. Yes, there's going to be some resistance. This is where you engage a board champion and you say, hey, I understand there's going to be some resistance to this, but what I need you to do is make sure that we remain strategic, back me up in this. And if we get off on a tangent or anything like that, bring it back and just say that's not an appropriate topic of discussion for the board meeting. Or you simply ask the question, how would this circumstance help us do a better job at achieving our strategic goal? So it's going to require you, yes, to have that confidence to speak up and to manage your board. And then number 5 is you're going to designate some meeting time for generative thinking. So generative thinking sounds scary, but it's not. And I tell you, it's not. I love designating time for generative thinking on my board agenda. So here are 3 examples of some sneaky generative questions that you can ask. So 1, list 5 reasons to put our organization in your will. Now, if you ask that question of a board member, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to open their minds to the possibility of putting the organization in the will. It's going to start that conversation around legacy giving. It's going to start that conversation around, maybe I'm not even giving to this organization, which 100% of your board members should be given to the organization, but it could kick off that conversation as well. Here's another one that I like. List 5 reasons why someone wouldn't want to be a donor. And as a group, they brainstorm how to overcome those objections. So why wouldn't someone want to donate to our organization? And give them time to talk about that and come up with the ways to overcome those objections. Another one, if a donor came to us today with $5 million, you can pick the number. What would our first priority be? What would our second priority be? What would our third priority be? See, these are the things that are going to get your board members juices flowing. That's going to give them time, put their thinking caps on in a different way. And those are some of the things that you want to make sure is happening in your board meeting. You don't want it to just be one person dictating all the information. You want them actively engaged. You are teaching them how to be a board member. You have to remember that sometimes, they come to the table without knowing their roles and responsibilities. Some come to the table without having served on a board before. And even if they have served on a board before, what happens is every board room is different. Every boardroom is different. And so this is going to allow you to structure the board meeting the way it needs to be structured for your organization. So designate some time for generative thinking. Spend a little time, kicking around ideas for important topics. What's your gift acceptance policy? How much money do you need in the bank before you invest some? What investments would be appropriate for your nonprofits? These are the kinds of conversation people will get people thinking bigger. And they're also going to be very educational for board members who have never thought about these things. And you're introducing a lot of fundraising concepts to them along this way when you're incorporating these generative questions and this generative thinking process. Now, generative thinking is a little bit upstream from strategy, but I think it's very critical that you offer your board members an opportunity to do some generative thinking during your board meetings. So what does that agenda look like? Because I'm saying an hour and a half and you want me to do all of this stuff. So what does that agenda look like? I understand that you're thinking, oh my God, I don't know if we can do this in an hour and a half, but here's a very simple agenda for you. And you can find this agenda again in the VIP resource library. It is there and it's a Word document. You can download it and you can tweak it and use it for yourself. Now, this agenda is based on a meeting that happens in the afternoon at 6 o'clock. And as you can see, meeting starts at 6:05. That gives those late bird time to come in. It ends at 7:30. And so what does it look like? 5 minutes. That mission moment, give your board goosebumps. It's only going to take 5 minutes. Whether you have, again, a client come in. Again, I was youth development. I understand I was in a good place because I can have kids come in and they could come in and they would come in and say their name, what school they went to, why they like coming to the after school program, what was the best part about it, what was the worst part about it. Board members would ask them some questions and that was it, 5 minutes. A consent agenda is going to take you 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Remember, it's one motion. You don't go consent agenda to approve the meeting minutes, the financials, the CEO report, the program. No, you make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, and that's it. Someone seconds, and boom, is done. 2 minutes. You're going to spend 20 minutes on board training and education. Now, what does board training and education look like is going to be determined by you. I've seen it done in different ways, and I did not spend a lot of time in this presentation talking about board education because I've done training on that before that you can access, but I've seen it done in different ways. One is, 20 minutes, you talk about board roles and responsibilities. You can talk about board income. You can bring in a guest speaker to talk about that. I oftentimes get invited in as a guest speaker to board meetings to facilitate these conversations for 20 minutes. And I always focus in on first, board roles and responsibility. Second is board role and fundraising. So those are the types of topics that can be done. I've also seen it and serve on a board where that 20 minutes of board education is actually breaking up into your committee groups and talking about what your committee is doing at that moment and what's the next steps for your committee. I've seen it done that way, and I actually appreciate that as well. And I've also seen where that 20 minutes is actually an activity. I have done this one as well, where you bring in your top donors, maybe 2 or 3 per board member, and you give them that donor's name and telephone number, and you give a script to them, and they spend that 20 minutes calling those donors and saying thank you based on the script that you gave them. And so you can do your board education and training in those various ways, but it's 20 minutes of your agenda. And then 40 minutes of your agenda, which I say again, is the meat of your agenda, is being strategic. It's that discussion around your strategic plan and talking about your strategic goals. Whether it's 1, 2, 3 goals, a good strategic plan has about 3 goals, right? And so that's what your board member is focused on. If your strategic plan has more than 3 goals, maybe then what you do is for this meeting, you talk about goals number 1 and 2. For the next meeting, you talk about goals number 3 and 4, and so forth. But the whole point is most of your discussion is going to be strategic in nature. And if anyone knows a good, not a good strategic plan, but if anyone knows, most nonprofit strategic plans are going to be talking about fundraising. So if you have an event coming up or something like that, that's what you're talking about during that time. So don't be afraid that you're going to miss something on your agenda. You're not, because you are meeting in advance to set your agenda, and you're making sure that your agenda is strategic in nature. And then you're going to spend 10 minutes, just 10 minutes on a generative question. And we've given those examples. And then 5 minutes on any new business. New business should not be a lot. That's why it's about 5 minutes. And then you adjourn. Now, what an optional thing that you can do here, and what my board did, was they did like to end the meeting with a program report, and not your traditional program report. They wanted to see pictures of the programs and of the kids in action and where they went, and just program highlights. And I love doing that, but that was done after the adjournment. For the people who wanted to stay and listen to that, it was about 10 minutes. Then they stayed and listened to that. For those who didn't, they left. But I tell you, almost 100% of my board members always stayed for that part, because they love seeing the pictures of the kids and the programs and the clients and all of that. But that is what that agenda looks like. And it can be done, and it can be very productive for your board. So post-meeting. Now, the role of the executive director is to support the board in between meetings. Now, that's really key. If you're going to get anything done, You have to remember you have to support the board in between meetings. So you have to facilitate communication between meetings, offering your support by making calls, setting up calendar reminders, shared documents, and sending emails to address any roadblocks that they may be experiencing, or assisting with the progress towards their goals. You cannot only talk to your board members at the board meeting. So you are at the board meeting, you make sure that notes are being taken. Either you can take the notes, or if you have a staff person there, they can take the notes. And I'm not talking about minute notes. Your board members should be taking, whoever your board secretary should take the minute notes. I'm talking about a report that talks about actions that need to be done. And so if Sabrina says that she's going to contact Susie for a sponsorship, or contact Susie to see if they can set up a meeting, you make a note of that. And then you actually hold her accountable for that. And you send an email and you say, hey, did you talk to Susie about this? And you send those reminders and you facilitate that. You follow up on those assignments that are discussed during the board meetings. And you review board expectations quarterly. Another thing that you can do to ensure that you're supporting your board members is have a one-stop shop online, command center, like a Google Drive. There's things such as Boardable, if you can afford Boardable, but a Google Drive will also work. That's where you're going to put critical documents, past meeting minutes, any updates they need for real-time visibility. And you're going to have in there a one-pager that has key facts and figures they can use to talk to others about your nonprofit mission. So that's how you're going to support your board members in between meetings, because you have to remember that your board members are volunteers with full-time jobs, families, and other responsibilities. They want to be engaged. They just need your support to get things done. And as a board member once told me, he served on several boards, and it's the squeaky wheel that gets my attention. So what I'm telling you is squeak. Be bossy. It is okay to be bossy with your board members. I used to always question myself, am I being too bossy? But now, in retrospect, having spoken with a number of board members, they are like, thank you so much for following up with us. Thank you so much for letting us know what to do, because, I'm busy. And when you did that, it told me, oh, I need to do this. And what I would do when, you did that, I would set aside an hour and I would work on all the things that you needed me to work on. Don't get frustrated with your board members if you're not doing that. You have to be the constant reminder. You have to be that squeak. You have to be. You have to make sure that your organization is a priority. And you have to remember that they're busy. And it's not intentional if they don't get back with you. It's not intentional if they fail to follow through with something. They need your support, and they need you to remind them. And so make sure that you are doing such for them, and make sure that, especially my founders out there, make sure that you have the confidence to approach your board members, to let them know what you need. If you don't, all you're going to get from them is, well, tell me what to do and I help with. Oh, I'm here to help. Just tell me what you need. That's what you're going to get. And you're going to be out there feeling like you're drowning, and they're going to think you're waving your hand in the water. And you're like, no, I'm drowning. But you have to be very specific with them, and you have to give them exactly what you need, and give them exactly the instructions for that. I can't stress that enough. So post-meeting is very critical. So how do you start? How do you start, doing this process or having this agenda? You just do it. There's no magic moment. You can add the mission moment now. You don't need your board's permission to add the mission moment. You can put the mission statement on the agenda. You can put the mission statement on your minutes. These are simple things that you can do. For a complete agenda overhaul, if you want to adopt the agenda that was presented, you need to make sure that the board chair and the CEO, the founder, executive director are on the same page. The agenda needs an overhaul, and you both agree to get the work done. You both agree that we're going to sit down and we're going to do this agenda 2 weeks in advance. We're going to bring in the committee members. We're going to set a standing meeting where we talk about agenda preparation. You have to be in agreement with that. The board chair needs to connect with the governance committee. That's if your board is large enough to have one. You don't want to leave out that governance committee. You want the buy-in of this group. You want to be sure that everyone is on the same page. And then the board chair's responsibility is to ensure the boardroom remains collaborative. It is their role to manage conflicting personalities and those who may have varying visions for your organization. So hopefully you have a strong board chair. And if you don't have a strong board chair, find yourself a good board champion that can work with that chair. So it's a peer-to-peer conversation, right? Have another board member that is a champion that you can, work through this situation with. I can't stress that enough. So just do it. It's just like Nike. Just start with some simple stuff. And then again, with the overhaul, there's some things that you have to put in place, but you gotta just start. So here's some tips that I have for you. Watch the clock. If the meeting is an hour and a half, the meeting is an hour and a half. If you are going to go over that hour and a half and you designated maybe perhaps 20 minutes for education and you realize it's going to go over, then ask for permission. I will say ask for permission. Let the board know, I know we designated 20 minutes for this discussion. However, it appears that it's going to go over by 10 minutes. With your permission, we'd like to move forward with that. But watch the clock. Stick to the agenda. You put a lot of time in the agenda. You met in advance. Y'all collaborated over this agenda. Let's stick to the agenda. Meet at different locations. Remember, we talked about locations. If you're facility-based, meet in your facility. This is going to give your board members opportunity to come into your facility, see the program in actions, maybe even interact with some clients. But if you're not facility-based, you may want to meet in different locations. It could be in a board member's home. It could be in a restaurant. But whatever it is, if you change the meeting location, then you have to make sure you communicate that change in advance, because we are creatures of habit. So for me, someone who's a creature of habit like myself, I like consistency. I want to know the board meeting is at this time, at this place, and it's at the same place every time, right? So even if that's virtual, if it's on Zoom, then I know it's on Zoom. Don't do me Zoom one week and then the next week it's in person. That's going to throw me off. I'm just telling you from that perspective. So ask everyone to bring at least one idea. That's a tip. That could be that generative thinking discussion topic. If your board members bring in that one idea, for solving a common problem, for raising money, or whatever else is a high priority, you might even kick this conversation off at your meeting by going around the room doing that generative discussion process and asking everyone to, share an idea, or you can write it on a whiteboard or a flip chart. Invite a guest speaker. Again, I get invited into board meetings all the time to facilitate discussions, to do board training. So you can invite in a guest speaker. You can show a video. Again, showing videos. People love videos, and they don't have to be sophisticated. They don't have to be this great edited process, but showing a video during your board meeting will give your board members a visual. And again, it could be your mission moment. And some of the best practices is, if you are in a nonprofit industry that uses a lot of acronyms, post up an acronym chart. Distribute name tags at every meeting, share some food, measure board effectiveness, and thank your board members. Don't forget to thank your board members. And so with that in mind, with the feedback, the document that's going to be provided to you is the board meeting feedback form. Pretty simple form. You don't have to do it at every board meeting. Maybe do it once a quarter, but get your board members' feedback on what is happening. And because boards are important, they provide oversight, influence strategy, oversees management, and guard against undue risk or compliance violation. They may even direct programs, lead fundraising, and champion the organization. In the smallest nonprofits, the board is the organization. These are big responsibilities and important tasks to get right. The most successful nonprofits know how to capitalize on their board members' strengths, knowledge, and commitment. Therefore, it's crucial to get the board meetings right. Great board meetings are usually what makes great boards great. So keep that in mind. And again, I want you to mark your calendar for the first Wednesday of each month at 12 noon. The next topic of conversation will be Unlock the Secrets of Saying Thank You, a Key to Fundraising Success. Today, I promised you tips for designing an effective agenda, practice to engage your board in planning your meeting, how to avoid ineffective meeting time suckers, and how to use consent agenda. And so I hope you found this valuable. You have two choices. Again, you can do it yourself, with what you learned today and Google, and it's going to get you a trial and error, or you might be wishing you had done, better by this time next year, or you can fast track your results for a great agenda. And with that in mind, I just want to give you some information that I'm launching a thriving nonprofit membership, and it's going to be sharing resources and support to help you build a thriving nonprofit focused on fundraising, board engagement, and community awareness. It's going to have an expanding library, courses, hot seats, office hours, mastermind, get shit done sessions, guest coaching. And it's going to be perfect for you if you're overwhelmed and things need to change, if you're wearing multiple hats, if you want to know how to get board members involved in fundraising, or my infamous is just me and I don't know where to start. And so why I'm doing this is because I'm passionate and mission driven to help nonprofit professionals like yourself. I know what it's like to struggle with your board and with fundraising. And I know this membership is going to help. So here's the QR code if you want to sign up for the wait list for the membership. And that's all it's going to do is you sign up on this list, and I'm just going to let you know that it is open and that you can join. And I have a few testimonials here about people that I've worked with, and they've inspired me really to create this membership. Gerald raised $75,000 on LinkedIn telling his nonprofit story. Emily got her board, 100% of her board members to start contributing to the organization. Stephanie had a successful event. Her goal was 3,000 to 5,000. She did 6,000. And Janice, I loved working with Janice. She said 3 people have accepted board membership. Thanks. I will be continuing your service. And then this was a new executive director to a nonprofit who they had not done fundraising in 5 years, and worked with him hand in hand. And they did an event that netted $40,000, and 85% of their board members are now giving. So this community is going to take all of those approaches and combine them into that community. So I encourage you to be a part of that.